everyone. We are back for another episode of The Carrot and the Stick. We had a little bit of a break. We had some traveling going on, really for both of us, both doing international travel. So we are back from this extended break, um, and we have some just really exciting stuff to cover. We've had a lot happening in Bittensor the last few weeks, and we're really excited to talk to you guys about it. Keith, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. It's good to be back here. It feels like we're talking about like almost an entirely new project at this point. If you step away, I think it's been I mean, at least 3 weeks since we recorded. And when you take that type of break in Bittensor, sometimes you come back and you're like, you barely recognize the room you left. And
Yeah.
we're certainly in that position now. Especially if you do a lot of your kind of updating and information gathering through X. I think you'll notice if you're following kind of the Bittensor, if you've inserted yourself into the echo chamber, the guys making noises, like a lot of them weren't even there a couple weeks ago. So we've got so many new accounts now. I bet you if you like aggregate it, there's tens of millions of new followers that are seeing, Bittensor posts, because we've got several 100,000 plus, sort of, I don't know, influencers, KOLs, however you want to describe them, who are on board the train at this point. So yeah, due time for an episode here, and it's good to be here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we've got like Wall Street Bets, we've got JCal, we've got all of these prominent figures on social media that um, are just talking about the stuff that's actually been happening all along in Bittensor. Like if you guys have been following along on this podcast or just in the ecosystem in general, like you guys know the kinds of teams that are in Bittensor and what everyone's cooking up. And now we're starting to see that get some public attention. And that's pretty cool. It allows Bittensor to kind of cut against the grain here in regards to the crypto bear market. And it's just cool to see Bittensor rise to get into the top 10 or even top 3 tokens when it comes to just mind share and attention. So it's just cool to see. I mean, we see, in addition to just the prominent individuals who are talking about Bittensor and Tau, we're seeing some big accomplishments from these subnets, which I think a lot of us kind of knew that it was inevitable for some of these subnets to produce, these groundbreaking achievements. But now we're starting to see that, and it's getting attention. We saw Templar producing their 72 billion parameter model, which in and of itself is just a stepping stone towards state of the art model training, but it's the largest model that's ever been trained in decentralized run. I think that video or post got like 1.6 million views or something like that.
Mhm.
So it got quite a bit of attention from the outside world. And then you had other projects like Targon with the Targon OS that was created. They collaborated with Intel. And so you had Intel actually touting a Subnet 4. And so we're seeing like all of these accomplishments being made, which is really just an inevitable function of the protocol. When the incentives are aligned to drive people towards innovation, like these kinds of things are going to happen, and the proof is in the pudding. Now we're seeing that come to fruition, come to reality. It's no longer just a hypothesis; it's here, and Templar is already on its way to producing their next model, and Targon's just making big waves. Um, and this is just exciting to see. We're seeing a lot of this mind share come to Bittensor, um, in a way that I think that we in the industry have already kind of been talking about, but just hearing that is kind of becoming more mainstream. We have NVIDIA, Jensen talking about Templar as well, Subnet 3, on the All In podcast, and just seeing all of this come together, it really it just brings um, joy to me to see that, like, oh, there's recognition for these teams, like the teams over at Covenant AI, the teams over at Manifold Labs, the teams really throughout the entire ecosystem, whether it be with Shoots, with any number of these other teams, Bitmine, Score, like all these great subnets that are doing these big things, it's now starting to get recognition, and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's how many years have we gone here and hundreds or thousands of posts of being like, they're talking about BitTensor, but they don't know it. You know, like we've been that's just been a mainstay in our sort of community at this point. And now we have finally inserted ourselves into the conversation. So I don't feel like any longer that when, especially anything to do with decentralized artificial intelligence or the combination of blockchain and AI or whatever. BitTensor is now, at least the word is uttered. There's like, is there a subnet for that? People are kind of considering our influence on, the wider open source and wider AI sort of movement in general as an influencing factor. And I mean, we talked about this before the pod, but you've got these acknowledgments from whether it's Coin Market or CoinGecko or CoinDesk or whatever the different, sort of protocols, or not protocols, but websites and abilities to kind of track what's going on, that we are at the top of the heap as far as blockchain meets AI is concerned.
Yeah,
So it's good to get that recognition finally. And the subnets, they're of course the ones that have brought us to this point over time. And like you said, like hundreds of millions of dollars in carrots being dangled out here each year for years upon years. This is what happens. Like it
yeah,
will attract the talent, it will attract the development, it'll attract the milestones that we've achieved, and those things will just naturally start to happen because the incentive is there, and everything's sort of proving itself out. I think as far as like people, if everyone wants it to happen faster or on their timeline or whatever, but from our seats, it's all happening. So I think it's beautiful to just kind of watch it develop at its own pace. And now we're getting some extra boosts from the new people sort of involved, the new investors that probably picked us up, under $200, that are happy to be championing the protocol and BitTensor at this point. And it's great to have some new blood um, as far as that's concerned. But it also, I think, highlights for me the need for this type of podcast, because for every new person that comes into BitTensor, there's a new misunderstanding of how this thing works.
yeah,
And all those things, of course, need to be addressed because there's thousands of new people getting involved, and the quality of the information as it passes through the social media sphere degrades. So we've got to
yeah.
especially with your being plugged in the way you are, bring this information to the people directly through podcasts like this. So I'm happy we're doing this.
Yeah, and this is a living ecosystem. This is an ecosystem that's always improving and evolving, just as the subnets themselves are always innovating. The protocol as well is making improvements, and so this is why on this pod we'd like to talk through like what are the things that are changing, what are the things that are improving, not to try to overcomplicate things, but actually try to simplify things to let people know that hey, if you're newish to BitTensor, or maybe you've been here for a while and you're just kind of curious about what's going on, we can talk about that on the podcast as well, so that it is the most clear possible how to build on BitTensor. Because when you have the intersection of crypto and AI are both individually very complex fields. And when you combine them together, you get a lot of crossover and you get a lot of um, just stacking of complexity, which can seem a little bit daunting at first. But once you get into that groove, it's actually a great experience to build on BitTensor. But it can be a little daunting at first, and that's what we like to uncover on this podcast. But one thing that I want to call out that I think is really special about the intention that we're getting with BitTensor is that it's not just a shout out for BitTensor broadly. It's actually the focus is on the subnets. It's like, people make the comparison that BitTensor is the internet and subnets are the websites. You don't ever say, oh, I watched a video on YouTube, and that's the internet that produced that. Like, we all know that that's the infrastructure, and the internet is like this great unlocking of communication between people. But if you see a video on YouTube that you like, you go to YouTube. You don't start writing Twitter posts about the internet for several hours. Um, I mean, maybe a while ago that's what was happening, but right
Yeah.
now, I mean, it's like, oh yeah, you see a website that you really like, Spotify is like, oh okay, I'm gonna start talking about Spotify. I'm not gonna talk about the internet, and HTTPS and TCP/IP. Like, you don't talk about those kinds of things. That's just the underlying infrastructure by which these products and services exist. Um, and that's exactly what Bittensor is. It's like, it's a protocol. The focus is on the projects being done in the protocol. And that actually legitimizes it, where you're not just talking about this hypothetical of Bittensor could allow for, whatever innovation. It's like, just focus on the things that are actually being done here. And Bittensor will benefit from that. And the focus really should be on the subnets. That's why I think it's great where, like, on the All On Pod, they're talking about Subnet 3. And that's what the focus was. It was like, great, let's talk about that project. It's an example of decentralized AI being successful. Great. And oh yeah, by the way, that was built on Bittensor. And you want to build something like that too? Go to Bittensor. Like, oh, by the way, Spotify was built on the internet. you know,
Yeah, yeah, and because we're still, I mean, I would even argue we're still, in this embryonic stage in BitTensor, which it's always part of the conversation. The platform comes hand in hand with the subnets, but we're getting to the point where, like, if you go back 2 years ago, we weren't even really talking about subnets very much. It was mostly about the protocol, especially for sure 3 years ago. But now there were no subnets. But now, what you're seeing is like basically an acknowledgement that, okay, the platform exists. It's like, if you design your subnet right, your incentive mechanism right, it's an enabler. It's like a dream maker. You can come in there with an idea, and the thing can bring it to life for you. The miners, the validators, the community through the investment. And the combination of those things, enable talented teams to come in and create some really amazing things. And the things that we've seen recently, like especially with the Templar thing, I don't think anyone's too concerned about, the size of the model itself, but the mechanism, the fact that it exists now, it's like that, that it happened. Well, now there's probably no limit to it too. Because if you go
yeah,
back like 9 months, they were doing like 1 billion parameter models or whatever. They were in the single digits. So if you could do like a 50x on the size of and what if they do another 50x in the next 9 months? Obviously it keeps getting harder to keep doing the 10x's or the exponential improvements. But the point is like the whole process of buying a subnet, putting the code in, attracting the miners, all the stuff with dynamic tau, like the fruits are now starting to like ripen on the tree here. And for some of the bigger subnets who've been going for a longer time with a higher level of talent and maybe or more organized, those fruits can start to be plucked off the tree, and we're starting
yeah.
to see that happen now. Yeah, and you can't deny it. And that's why we're in this position, because like no matter how much shit anyone wants to talk or compare this to that, you just can't deny the things that are coming out of the protocol because they're real. You can put your hands on them. Like the potentiality aspect has always been the thing that attracted me to BitTensor in the beginning. And that continues to be an attractor for others at this point. But now we're seeing the realities come out of the protocol in the form of these achievements, and those things are undeniable. And that's why we're attracting a totally different type of investor at this point too, that probably
Yeah.
doesn't dip their toe in when they don't know if it works 100% quite yet. But now that you've got these proof of concepts that have turned into intelligence commodities, yeah, we're essentially undeniable at this point.
Yeah, I mean, attracting the attention of people that are not crypto native is huge for us, because this is a moment where, a year ago, kind of like what you were saying earlier, is that we're looking at all kinds of technologies, innovations, projects, aspirations, whatever you want to look at online. And we would say, oh, well, that could be a subnet, and that should be a subnet.
Mm.
And now what we're seeing is, oh, that is a subnet. And the subnet is actually winning at that project or in that field. And the world is starting to pay attention. And the world is inevitably going to pay attention, right? Because if we do our job well, we're going to win at whatever thing that we're tackling because of the incentives. It's an economic engine that aligns towards winning. And once you win, it's impossible to ignore. And so that's why we're getting that kind of attention. And the Templar model, as much attention as it got, was in and of itself just a stepping stone. It was a proof of concept to say, hey, Bittensor works, decentralized training works. And that in and of itself shocked the world. And now we're going to be seeing in the near, not too distant future, I imagine, models that are coming out that are state of the art or even better than current state of the art, all trained decentralized, which is really important in this phase that we're in of AI. Like we're starting to see a lot of drama in the AI industry. I don't know if you guys have paid much attention to the drama with the different AI companies in regards to the Department of War and like all of the politics involved there. I don't want to talk too much about that because it is just that, it is politics. But the point is that when you have a decentralized training run, you cut through all of that noise. It's not about, well, you know, these companies are going to be gatekeeping this model can only be used for this purpose or that purpose or whatever. It's let's focus on the raw technology and let's keep things open, and that'll actually create a safer product, a more trustworthy product for everybody. And I think we're just seeing throughout the industry, not only is our subnets killing it, but the need for subnets is also exponentially increasing. And I think that that's an opportune moment for BitTensor. I think the market is kind of responding to that, where they're saying that, okay, BitTensor's got signal that is different than what the rest of the crypto market is experiencing right now. And that's really encouraging, where people are starting to realize what this really is.
Yeah, and it's the result of good people putting in hours and hours for years and years trying to build something in good faith effort to do all the things, open it, decentralize it, and you just like over time, if you just keep tapping, like eventually you're going to get through. And I think we just, increase the size of the hammer over time as well, and also the amount of people that are involved now and the talent at each of these um, at each of these different subnets and the size of these teams and the real business applications that I'm seeing and the focus on sustainability outside of just the emission structure that the successful subnets are doing as well to kind of create standalone businesses that could operate independent of the emissions that they maybe relying on BitTensor for funding in early stages. It's everything that we hoped it would be, and it's put us in a great position here going into the middle of 2026.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk now about the protocol. I mean, we've seen a lot of achievements being made on this protocol, but it wouldn't be a carrot and the stick podcast without talking about some of the latest and greatest improvements in Bittensor and kind of giving you guys a behind the scenes view of what's going on in Bittensor, what's improving with this protocol. And like I said earlier, this is a living mechanism, a living engine, and it in and of itself is kind of an incentive mechanism, like a subnet. Bittensor itself is a subnet in a way, and we're seeing some interesting changes that I'd love to talk about here in this pod because some of these I think are going to be really impactful in a good way, and some of them are going to be impactful in a maybe sort of a band-aid way, like a ripping off the band-aid sort of way. So let's dive right into it. The first thing I want to talk about is seeding liquidity in new subnets. This is something that the team over at the OTF is working on right now. It's coming soon. But basically, the concept here is the idea is to take the registration fee for new subnets and to use that as the initial liquidity for a subnet. So for those of you who don't know, there are 128 subnet slots. Let's say that you wanted to buy a new subnet. Well, how that works is, I mean, there's already 128 subnets. There's not going to be 129, at least not right now. And so, what do you do? Well, there's a registration fee that goes up and down based on market demand. And when you buy a subnet, you're essentially booting out the lowest performing subnet. So the lowest performing subnet is on the chopping block. It's at risk of deregistration. And when you register a subnet, you're paying to basically take over that slot. And what happens with the fee that you pay is it just gets recycled. It goes essentially nowhere, and it just essentially vanishes. You pay however much tau. It could be 500 tau. It could be, I think it's like right now like 850 some tau, which is not a small amount of money, and it just goes nowhere. And so this change would allow for that tau to be used for something productive, which is solving this problem of new subnets having really low liquidity. And this is a key problem because new subnets will have an immense amount of volatility with their price because they'll have such low liquidity that any action to buy or sell the subnet will cause the price to skyrocket or to collapse all the time. And that makes the subnet not as attractive, and it makes the subnet kind of difficult to invest in, where even if you have conviction about the team, you have conviction about the project, you want to kind of hold off and you want to let some alpha get accumulated before you really want to take the plunge into that subnet. And this kind of helps alleviate that initial concern of, can I get into a subnet that may be a good subnet, but is too early for me to get into, because I don't want to get, become a victim to either slippage or just low liquidity, where I end up paying a way too high a price for alpha tokens. And so this provides a usefulness to the registration fee. It solves the problem of really low liquidity in subnets. But then there's a kind of a natural question of, okay, well, if I'm inserting tau into the liquidity pool, how much alpha is going to be there? And this is kind of the topic that I think is the most interesting, is that right now, as it's being implemented, is the amount of alpha that is being inserted into the pool is based on a presumed price, which is the median of all subnet prices. So what does that mean? That means that on day one, a subnet will be seeded with initial liquidity, and that price for that subnet will be in the middle of all the other subnets. What does that do? Well, it provides pressure for the subnet owner to say, hey, you're already middle of the pack. You start off middle of the pack, which means you can go higher from here, but you can also go lower from here. So there's pressure to perform. There's pressure uh, to not just rise through the ranks, but to keep your rank. And I think this is a pretty interesting way to approach it. I think the initial design for this was, let's use the lowest previous subnet price. But the problem with that is that it kind of implies that new subnets will just be fighting over the last 10 or 15 slots, and they'll be fighting over these really low price point subnets. Whereas this allows a subnet that was previously deregistered, right? It was previously the lowest performing subnet, now immediately shoots to the middle of the pack. And the question is, can the subnet owner keep it up? And that provides the subnet owner with this pressure of, hey, I've got a good thing here. Can I put in the work to making sure that this thing stays afloat in the middle of the pack, and then even go above that? And so I think this will raise the standards for new subnets, and it should provide some motivation. But this is a bit of a theory. This is something that's totally new for Bittensor. So, Keith, you're hearing this kind of with fresh eyes, um, fresh ears, I should say. What do you think about this?
Um, yeah, the benefits of it, I think, importantly, are that it just bootstraps the liquidity, like you mentioned. So there's not this period of time, and actually, it's quite a bit of liquidity. It's roughly right now, the last registration price, we're up to like 650 or 675 tau. is the going rate for a subnet. So that's 200K, roughly 200K. That's quite a bit, and it would take a normal subnet, especially one that didn't have a lot of hype around it, quite a bit of time and investment to reach that point. And if they were just doing it over, through emissions, it would take actually a very long time. So, to give those subnets kind of a boost up to the middle of the pack, and importantly, it's not distributing alpha to any owners or investors or anything like that. It's just seeding the pool. So it's really, and also, why was that tau burned in the first place that we were using to register subnets? It's because, like, what else were we going to do with it? I don't necessarily think it was like we need to burn it. It was just like, well, that seems like a good spot to put it because we all benefit from that. It extends the token distribution schedule out a little bit. Um,
Mm.
but this, uh, independently of adding liquidity, it also preserves or allows the subnet registrar to preserve that initial investment and put it towards the operations of their subnet, right? So, like, that's, I can imagine, as someone coming into Bittensor and thinking you want to take the plunge, but you got to essentially light 200K on fire in order to walk across the threshold here. That can be a pretty large pill to swallow. So now, even though you don't have access to it necessarily right away as an owner, and if you do try to access it by dumping, your owner emissions immediately, of course, that's going to put a bad taste in everybody's mouth in investing in the subnet. So that's probably not going to happen in most cases. But it just puts you in a position really where you can sort of rationalize the investment of the subnet itself as someone new coming to Bittensor, that you don't automatically have to just pay 200K to nobody, you know? And so I like that aspect of it a lot. I think as the token price continues to rise, and what looks like a rising registration fee continues to find whatever equilibrium it's going to find, that this mechanism will become even more and more important, especially once we get past the 128. I just took a quick look, and I think that's going to put us for new subnet registrations when this is implemented somewhere around the 0.005, 0.006, price range, as far as tau to alpha, and that's basically, there's operating subnets in that range, like, that some people would think are at least maybe not necessarily successful at this point, but on the path. So it's not like, it's not like, just throwing them into the bottom of the pile. There's people that are working, many teams that are working very, very hard to maintain that level of price. So that'll be seen as an advantage as well. And in the name of incentive, again, this will just bring in more quality teams, because
Yeah.
it just adds another, little carrot out there into the potential that is Bittensor, in that you don't lose the registration fee. So I'm for it. It's going to prevent some situations that we saw maybe a month or two ago with, some automatic investing in subnets with very low liquidity and some big losses that kind of happened there because of that. This mitigates some of those, some of that exposure for new entrants that are finding a new subnet as well, mitigates kind of the damage a little bit. I'm not seeing many negatives with it. What was were there any, like, major negatives discussed when the implementation was looked at, more closely?
I think that if there's any concern, it's really just by putting a brand new subnet directly in the middle of the pack, um, you're potentially upsetting the lower half, the bottom half of subnets, who are maybe still working really hard, but just haven't maintained a price that's in the middle of the pack or higher. And so by having a new subnet that has not proven itself to immediately have that kind of price, like, that's kind of where I could see the controversy coming from. I could see some people getting
Right.
a little bit upset about that. But that being said, I think what this does is it allows people, I mean, if you have a price at the median, that means that your alpha is worth something, which means that you're giving a new subnet an opportunity to have high quality miners that are actually incentivized with a decent amount of money. Um, they get an opportunity to be paid well. And if the subnet doesn't do so well and the sell pressure continues to drive it down and there's not enough investors that are buying into it, it'll find itself well within the bottom 50% very soon. So I think this is a pretty mild complaint. Um, but this is something that I think is it's interesting because with it being in the middle and you having this opportunity to uh, to incentivize your miners well. I mean, it's basically giving people kind of the benefit of the doubt to say, hey, you started a new subnet. If you do your job well, uh, you will have no problem incentivizing miners. You'll have no problem attracting miners to participate in your subnet because your alpha is worth something. And that way, you don't have this two-step launch to your subnet where the first step is get enough of an alpha price where you attract decent miners. And then once you have decent miners, then actually accomplishing what your subnet wants to accomplish. It's like, this is basically saying like, hey, day one, you've got, the world is your oyster. You can go anywhere you want to go. You can also go to the floor. So
Yeah.
you've got,
And it can take months to reach that point if for some subnets as well.
yeah,
So
exactly.
it really
Exactly.
does fast track new entrants, and it also puts a little bit of, I would say, that big of a damper, but like acquiring existing subnets maybe doesn't seem like totally necessary anymore because you can kind of bootstrap yourself a little bit. Because of course, you know that this mechanism of starting subnets at zero was increasing the value of existing subnets. And this maybe
Yeah.
takes a little bit off the top there. What's the idea as far as an emissions perspective? Like if someone registers a subnet for 650 tau, from the chain's perspective, does it look like somebody made a 650 tau buy the moment the subnet is registered? So is it going to immediately start earning emissions or no?
I don't think it does start emissions. I think that it's still like the tau flow starts at the registration time,
Yeah,
and the initial
that's good.
registration fee is not included in that. And so that way, you're not hogging emissions by being an unproven subnet. So the chain doesn't
Yeah,
actually pay for anything. Um, and this is something, by the way, like if you guys remember, if you guys have been in Bittensor for a while, a long time ago, we actually had what was called a lock cost for subnet registrations. And the reason why it was called that, and some people still call it that, just out of habit, the lock cost for buying a subnet slot. The reason why it was called that is because your tau wasn't burned or recycled. It was actually locked. And so if your subnet ever got deregistered, you got all of that tau back. And so investing into a subnet to actually create a subnet was worth it because, well, I mean, you did have your tau kind of tied up, but you had two options. Your tau, your subnet was either going to be successful, in which case the tau was worth the investment, or it's not going to be successful. It's going to get deregistered, in which case you get your tau back. So it's almost risk free. I mean, there's really the opportunity cost of what else you could be doing with that tau, but aside from that, it's essentially risk free. And then that got switched to a new mechanism, which is the burning and recycling, where you're just out the tau. If you spend 500, 600 tau for a subnet registration slot, it's just out, and that makes buying a subnet really difficult because that is not a small amount of tau. That's not something an individual person is likely to want to just throw away on a whim, and so that's a pretty hefty chunk of a startup's seed funding to buy a subnet slot. So what this does is it takes that capital and it allows it to be useful for the subnet to say, hey, at least this is not a waste. At least this is something that is useful to jump starting my subnet, giving some initial liquidity, getting a price point that attracts some good miners. I've got a legitimate shot of making my subnet successful. So I think this is actually a change that's for the best. I think that the guys at the OTF and otherwise, and anybody else who's contributing towards the development of the chain, should be simulating this and understanding what the expected behavior is going to be from this. But aside from that, like on a surface level, this seems like something that is a net positive.
yeah. From the investor side too, it also makes these subnets look more attractive. Because if you know what you're doing and you're looking at these subnets and you're like, this subnet just got registered, it's got a, the 200 tau in the pool or whatever, doesn't look that attractive. The risk is extremely high. The higher the tau in the pool, the more money you're going to attract in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think this is a net positive. Of course, the asterisk with that being, you know, does the R&D pan out? Does the feature actually create this behavior that we're anticipating it will? But this is my hunch. This is my hunch about how this feature will go. But there's another feature that I want to talk about, which is also kind of related to new subnets, but it's not about registration. It's about validators. And this came up from really an identification of friction with subnet ownership, which was that if you're a subnet owner, the relationship that you have with validators is key because they're the ones that are going to be running your subnet code. So for you guys who are maybe not familiar with the subnet owner lifecycle, is the subnet owner, aside from registering the slot, is also the one who runs or who writes the code that defines the incentive mechanism of the project that your subnet is focused on. But you're not the one that runs that. The validators are the ones that run that. They run the code. They're the ones who are actually measuring the miner performance. They set the weights. They come to agreement in consensus. That's how UMA consensus works. What's been happening, though, is in some cases we see this kind of gravitation towards the subnet owner just being the sole operator of the validators. And what that means is the subnet owner will actually create their own validator and they will run that. And then they'll just ask for the other validators to allocate their stake weight via child keying to them. And so they could say, hey, don't worry about running a validator. We'll run it. Just give us your stake weight and your voting power, essentially. And this is something that we've seen actually with some of the most successful subnets, so they've gravitated towards a one validator model, partially because the infrastructure cost is very expensive, partially because maybe the nature of their subnet doesn't really need that many validators operating. I mean, the limits could be endless, or the reasons could be endless as far as why the subnets might want to gravitate towards a single validator solution. But one of the key reasons why a subnet owner might want to be a validator, and also the only validator, is because of developer friction. Is there's no relationship management that needs to happen if you are a subnet owner that is operating your own validator, as opposed to working with all the other validators in the ecosystem. And this is a particular friction point if you're a new operator of a subnet and you don't know the people in the industry already. You don't know the validators personally. You haven't built those relationships yet. And so this permissionless network of Bittensor starts to feel permissioned. It starts to feel like I need to talk to somebody and build a relationship with somebody so that they can run my code, troubleshoot with me, work with me, so that I can effectively measure my miner's performance and actually cold start this subnet engine. That is a very real pain point. The proposed solution to this is that upon the registration of a subnet, all of the root validators, the major validators in Bittensor, would automatically child hotkey to the subnet owner's key, which basically gives a subnet owner the voting power to be the sole central validator in their subnet. This solves the pain point because if I'm a subnet owner and I start a new subnet, I can start validating as soon as I'm ready because I have the stake weight to do so. It's automatically allocated to me by every other root validator. And then in concert with this would be the option of the validators to remove that child hotkey with no cooldown, no rate limit, no anything, within the time frame between the subnet registration and the subnet owner turning on the subnet with the start call. So between those time frames, the root validators could decide to pull their child key stake weight away, but that's a different
And
workflow.
also after, right? Like
Yes,
after the
but
start of the subnet.
there is a delay on child hotkeying right now. So it's a 24-hour delay. So if you
Right.
say, I want a child hotkey or not child hotkey, it takes 24 hours for that to go into effect. And that's
Okay.
because people were abusing child hotkeying. And so what this would do is basically say before that start call, there would be none of that. There would be no limitations there. You could bounce around your child hotkey wait any which way you wanted before that start call. Then after that, the 24-hour waiting period would go back into effect. Um, so this was something that was talked about in a community call this week, and it stirred up some controversy because while it does solve the pain point of the subnet owner not knowing who the validators are, not having those relationships, and therefore not being able to really start their subnet because the validators maybe aren't running their code yet, this creates potentially some other problems, which is that if all stake weight is gravitated towards the single owner validator key, that everyone's going to have high V-trust, and nobody's going to be incentivized to start hardware validating unless by the request of the subnet owner for some reason. Um, but the most likely case, I think, is that the subnet owner will just be the validator. And as a consequence, UMA consensus will be ineffective because it'll just be one validator on every subnet that operates. And I think this needs to breed a broader conversation of, is UMA consensus a necessary function of Bittensor, or does the single validator model work? And I think that while this feature was created with the intent of solving the pain point that subnet owners have of dealing with validator relations, and while I sympathize with that concern, I think that this actually should stir up a conversation that's much more broad about what is the future of validation, what kind of validation is needed in Bittensor, not just what's wanted by subnet owners, but what is needed on a network level in order to be successful. Because UMA consensus has been a big part of the uh, the nature of Bittensor since its very beginning. It's part of the Bittensor white paper. And so the question is, how important is UMA consensus realistically? Or are we discovering, as we are with some of the most successful subnets, Templar, Shoots, etc., that a single validator model is actually perfectly effective? And if anyone's not confident in that, then they just shouldn't buy the subnet and let the market decide which subnets are good and which subnets are not good. The reason why some would argue that a single validator model per subnet is working is because the alternative to that, which is you have multiple validators that are operating within that subnet, it creates this almost sort of policing mechanism where validators are um, reviewing code. They're deciding, hey, do I want to put my name attached to this? Do I want to be a part of this? Do I want to spend the resources to actually running this code? Sometimes the resource requirement is pretty heavy. Do I want to spend money to operating the subnet? And if I don't, then I don't have to participate. But now the subnet owner is kind of struggling because he might struggle to get validators to participate in that subnet. And it kind of creates this policing mechanism where validators might say, hey, I don't want to participate in this either because the code doesn't work, or this is a subnet that I don't think that we're aligned with. We don't want to participate in this. We don't want to spend money to make this successful. Therefore, we're going to burn. We're going to just set all our weights to burn the emissions, and we're not going to participate. And this has created what is commonly known throughout the ecosystem as the burn police. And I think a lot of the people in the ecosystem would say the burn police is not effective, the burn police is not necessary, the burn police is not, it's a bug, not a feature. And I think that this is a very broad conversation, and we need to really think about what is the future of validation, because we have these validators that are operating today, and what is their future? And what benefit are they creating? Because if we decide that they're not necessary and then we're wrong about this 6 months from now, it's not going to be so easy to just restart all of those validators, because these are companies that are built their business models off of validation. This is what they do. And I think it's important for us to be very deliberate about what we want validation to be and what we think it needs to be. And so that's really what I want to highlight on this pod is for anyone here who is deeply invested in the Bittensor ecosystem, you're an operator of a subnet, a validator, a miner, whatever it may be. I think this is a really important topic, and it needs to be considered appropriately and to understand what the ripple effects are of what we're doing here. There's a lot of pain points within Bittensor that I think can be solved in a lot of different ways, which gives us opportunities to explore all kinds of ideas. And this is an opportunity here to talk about what is the future of validation, because I think that there are a lot of pain points with validation as it pertains to subnet owners. And the question is, what do we do about that? So, Keith, what do you think?
This conversation is the gift that, keeps on giving. It's been had in various forms, probably since before I was validating, and I validated until we had like 52 or 53 subnets or something. And to your point, like the relationship management, even just with me and one subnet owner, like it was taxing for me as an individual across all of those subnets. But for a subnet owner to then also maintain all of those things and all those relationships and keep that spinning, I'm sure it can be difficult, and it requires time that you simply must spend. So like there's a lot of times there's not really a way to shortcut it, because you could be dealing with all types of different personalities, skill levels, equipment. I mean, each validator brings all kinds of unique characteristics to the table for these budgets, team size, availability, the time zone. It goes on and on and on. And of course that's difficult, but part of the game that you're going to have to play if you want to decentralize the operation of your subnet without, people like to say like, well, the intelligence, it's coming from the miners. You got it. The miners are the unsung heroes. Well, if the validators aren't running the code, there is no subnet, you know? So you have to have that happening. Of course, you can centralize it, and then we end up at the question of what is the value of decentralization. Right now, at this stage where Bittensor is still pretty small, I think, and maybe not viewed as a primary, like immediate threat to some of these larger entities in the artificial intelligence space, I don't believe that we're getting quite the level of sort of attacks that I think we'll get in the future. So, like, from my perspective, as someone that's interested in pushing this protocol in a direction that I think is best for everybody, both its investors and its builders and its customers in the end. For me, decentralization matters as an element of my investment, and especially along certain, like, not really business critical, but really like community critical subnets, like the subnets in Bittensor that form the backbone and have many, many, like dozens of integrations, like shoots or something. Or probably what we'll see happening with other subnets that provide like core services, foundational services to the technology stack that other subnets rely on. For those subnets, I want to see decentralization, because I believe it hardens and creates more of a resiliency for Bittensor in general. And maybe we don't need it now, but I think we're going to need it. I don't know when that's going to come, but I
Mhm.
do feel like, we should build the fortress in a good spot,
Yeah.
on the cliff or wherever we're going to build it, where it has some natural defenses baked in. And the fortress for Bittensor is the way that the protocol are designed and the way the subnets are incentivized to operate. So, like, yeah, and also to set the stage maybe for a couple other points in this conversation, Yuma consensus, if you're listening to this and you're like, what the hell is Yuma consensus? It's just the sort of like governing scoring structure for how you determine if validators are operating in a good or bad way on Bittensor. And it essentially like penalizes you if you deviate, from the herd in your scoring of miners, and tries to use this distribution of stake to, multiple actors in order to make sure if someone's trying to, double dip here and validate while they're mining and reward their own miners or whatever exploit they're trying to do with their validator, that you've got human consensus and the good intentions and hardware, hopefully hardware validating of the herd, keeping everybody in line. So that's kind of what Yuma is. Of course, when you go, every actor you eliminate, and once you get down to like 2 or 3 validators or one validator, of course, there is no Yuma consensus. There's just the one validator scoring everybody. So, for me, that's part of the, like secret ingredients of the sauce for Bittensor is Yuma. It's one of the things that separates us from every other protocol that exists, is this fuzzy logic around the value of like the intelligence commodities being generated, and that for many subnets that they are being scored by a number of actors, and then through Yuma consensus, the quality of those outputs are, not necessarily guaranteed, but incentivized. So like, I don't like us going in that one validator direction, although I can understand it. And for certain subnets that have non-critical outputs or infrastructure, I guess I don't really care. I would probably, though, at some point encourage the community, if we do end up going in this, well, we've already gone in this direction, really. But if we do continue to go down this road of like letting subnet owners have the majority, or maybe validators like welcome them running their validator because it makes their job so much easier, because all you have to do is essentially point your validator at theirs, and you get to, just like in your Tesla or whatever, it's like hands-free driving at that point, and you still collect all the benefits as a validator operator, and you can still take your 9% or whatever your take is. So, like, I understand all that. At the same time, like, I would like to see the metric for the distribution of stake across actors be a characteristic, a qualitative measurement that comes to the forefront of all of the different, tau.com, tau stats, tau app. I want to see them all. I want to see that towards the top, right up there with the flow and the emissions and everything else, because this long term is critical. And if you design your entire subnet around one validator, I really don't think you are going to be on a design track that's going to be easily swapped for decentralization. The other thing that I would mention with the single versus multiple validator track is that as you're designing a subnet, when you have multiple validators, if you truly have distribution of stake, I think it's going to really change the way that you're writing code, that you're thinking about your subnet. It's going to put you on a totally different track of development than if you've just got your own validator running on the, on the whatever server next to you, and you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And it really changes your whole Bittensor experience and your subnet in general. And so, like, if you do choose to go down that route as a subnet owner, I think it's a short-term, decision, a little bit of a short-sighted decision. And if you have the ability to go the other direction, I think it's going to pay dividends for sure in the long run.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think that for me, this is an opportunity to think about how do we solve the pain points of subnet ownership, but also solve the pain points of validators. And this is really a starting point for me of the conversation of what's the future of validation. And maybe it's a multifaceted approach. Maybe it's not a one size fits all situation, but it's an interesting conversation starter for sure. Um, so let's be thinking about that as a community. If you're listening to this podcast, let's be thinking about that. What is the future of validation in Bittensor? And feel free to drop in the comments what you guys think. I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts.
I could see a situation real quick of just like, legislation being passed or something, of like, let's say you're operating a subnet and you're running it from a certain country, and whatever AI intelligence commodity you're generating, for whatever reason, is now illegal from, essentially one day to the next. If you're not
Yeah.
prepared through having, your validation process distributed globally, or, at least distributed outside of your jurisdiction, your subnet becomes vulnerable to legislation, you know? I mean, that's just one small thing, and whether it's like you're also vulnerable to attack and equipment outages and all this stuff. The resiliency just goes way down. It's all the same conversations as to why everything's decentralized anyway in crypto.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Exactly. Well, cool. Well, let's wrap it here. I think that this is a lot to think about um, in terms of protocol changes and there's a lot here that could be really impactful with Bittensor. So let's wrap it here. But this is a great conversation, great way to get back into the swing of things. We are back, guys, and it's exciting to be talking about Bittensor again. Well, take care, everybody.
See you guys.